When you take a look at Targaryen history, there are some very big names that jump out when trying to decide who is counted among the best warriors. But at the same time, there are some that really do fly under the radar and are very underappreciated in terms of their skill at arms. Sometimes this is because of their position within House Targaryen, maybe being a second son, or in some cases, their other achievements overshadowing their martial pursuits. You then also have some that you would think were these well-regarded, competent warriors, but once you take a deeper look, you find they very rarely actually picked up a sword. You then also have to consider what is being defined as being a good warrior. Is it their action on the field of battle? Or does tourney combat also factor in? And then, when talking about House Targaryen, we also have to think about how dragons fit in to all of this as well. Does being a good dragon rider also make you a good warrior? Or is this idea of being a warrior and a dragon rider separate things, given how very different they are? Yes, there are some crossover in traits. For example, you still need to think tactically and possess courage as a dragon rider, but at the same time, many of the skills that make a good swordsman or archer don't play as big of a role when on dragonback, for the most part. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking at the members of House Targaryen who were skilled in arms when not on dragonback. Nothing demonstrates this warrior dragon rider debate better than Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys. We have Rhaenys Targaryen, who by all accounts was no warrior, which for the most part for Targaryen women is not that unusual. But the fact she was a dragon rider negated this somewhat, because despite her lack of skill at arms, she was still a competent dragon rider, maybe even arguably the best out of her 3 siblings. And she did take part in key battles during the conquest and the first initial invasion attempt of Dorne. But her strength comes from her dragon and not her martial skill. Aegon the Conqueror himself is a bit of a puzzle, because he was said to be both a well-regarded warrior as well as a dragon rider. Now, Aegon historically is regarded as one of the best warriors of his generation, but it seems that most of his reputation comes from his dragon riding rather than martial pursuits. Every combat encounter he seems to have faced from before the conquest in the Century of Blood, and during the conquest itself, and his reign, all happened on dragonback. The only recorded instance of Aegon fighting with a weapon was during the First Dornish War, where he duelled the champion of Lord Toland, who Aegon defeated with ease. It turns out that this champion was in fact Toland's mad fool, thus is not really a fair test at all. When you consider this and the fact that Aegon never fought in tourney or melee, it's really hard to judge his skill as a warrior, given we have little to no context to base the claim, other than the vaguest statements in Fire and Blood. Now, Visenya Targaryen is where it starts to get interesting. Despite her gender, she was trained in martial pursuits with Aegon, and by most accounts in Fire and Blood was very skilled with a blade, even better than Aegon himself. The difference with Visenya versus Aegon's skill at arms is we do actually have examples of her using these skills. During the First Dornish War, Visenya and her escort were once attacked in the growing new city of King's Landing. She cut down the would-be assassins herself with Dark Sister. Visenya also twice wielded her longsword in defense of her brother from Dornish assassins. When Aegon argued that his guards were still sufficient for his protection, Visenya drew Dark Sister. Before his guards could even react, she had cut Aegon's cheek, pointing out to him that his guards were slow and lazy. Now, while cutting his cheek might seem like a minor thing, to do so with such speed and precision before anyone, Aegon or his guards could even react, is not an easy thing. If she misjudged her speed or the placement of her attack by a fraction, Aegon is going to be badly wounded, maybe even dead. So while the history around Visenya is still vague at best, there are at least some clear examples of why she gained this reputation. We cannot forget that she also wielded her own Valyrian steel blade as well, a blade that would in future generations be wielded by many distinguished warriors. Dark Sister. Maegor the Cruel. the son of Aegon and Visenya, is a real clear-cut case of a good warrior, wherein we have a lot more documented cases as to why he is considered to be so renowned. Maegor is said to have been a born warrior, whose skills with a weapon were unmatched by anyone in his generation. He was given a sword at the age of 3 and took to swordplay immediately. In his youth he lived for war, tourneys and battles, and rose to become one of the youngest and finest knights of his time. However, he was also said to be a hard and brutal man, who craved violence, death, and absolute mastery over all those he deemed his. His savagery in the field and his harshness towards his defeated enemies was frequently remarked upon and added to his hard and feared reputation. Maegor became a squire at the age of 8, like many of his peers, but unlike them, by the age of 12, he was already unhorsing boys 4 and 5 years his elder in the list and battering seasoned men-at-arms into submission in the castle yard, and by the age of 13, he was already defeating hardened knights in training melees. His mother gave him her Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, as a name day present when Maegor turned 13. By 28 AC, he won renown in tourneys by defeating 3 knights of the Kingsguard in a joust, and then winning a melee. It must also be pointed out that knights of the Kingsguard were no normal knights, and seen as the very best of the best. So for him to beat 1, let alone 3, is a huge deal. He was knighted by his father, Aegon the Conqueror, at the age of 16, making him the youngest knight in the realm at the time. While there might be a case of nepotism at play here, when you look at all of Maegor had achieved by this point, it's hard to argue he did not have the needed skill. In both 29 and 30 AC, Maegor assisted the Master of Ships, Lord Aethan Velaryon, at the hand of the King Sir Osmond Strong, in a campaign against the pirate king Saragos San in the Stepstones, and in 31 AC defeated the outlaw Giant of the Trident and his band of rebels. Now, we must recall at this point in time, Maegor had not yet claimed a dragon. Therefore, all these conflicts he was a part of were done in a normal way of fighting, with sword and shield, which makes these achievements much more impressive than any on dragonback. Of course, after the death of his father Aegon the Conqueror and his brother Rhaenys became king, Maegor would claim his father's dragon, Baelor, after which most of his combat then happened on dragonback. Arguably, his most famous feat comes after his usurpation of the throne from his nephew, with his trial of 7 in King's Landing. While the fight was 7 on 7, Maegor did kill several of his opponents himself, being the last man left standing, but taking a serious blow to the head that almost killed him. The trial of 7 is really what cemented his reputation as a warrior. Despite the many negative aspects of Maegor's rule, he wasn't called the Cruel for no reason, but he did earn his reputation as a warrior. Jaehaerys the Conciliator is definitely one of the most overlooked picks when it comes to the best Targaryen warriors. While his combat history isn't as extensive as his uncle Maegor, it's clear that Jaehaerys did have a decent level of skill that I think gets overlooked and is in the shadow of Jaehaerys' monolithic reputation as, well, the Conciliator. So why do I think Jaehaerys should be considered for this list when there are so many more obvious picks? Well, most of the battles Jaehaerys fought were indeed on dragonback, such as the 4th Dornish War. He did fight several single combats at various stages of his life. We know from Fire and Blood that Jaehaerys was said to have been a gifted rider by the time he was 14, already skilled with a lance and a longbow. It's also stated that he followed a rigorous training regime during his minority on Dragonstone before he came of age and took rule of the kingdom into his own hands, and that during this time he became skilled at arms to the point where Sir Ellis Scales, Jaehaerys' master at arms, that while Jaehaerys would never be skilled enough to join his own Kingsguard, he had enough skill to beat his uncle Maegor in single combat, had Maegor still lived, of course. It's really hard to qualify these statements, but it does suggest that while Jaehaerys was not a top-tier fighter like a Kingsguard knight, he was good enough to challenge and beat a renowned, highly skilled fighter like Maegor. The issue we have is we have no idea where Maegor stands in terms of skill in comparison to a Kingsguard knight. There is also a possibility that these comments by Sir Ellis are simple flattery of the young king, but from what we do see of Jaehaerys in combat, suggests there may be some element of truth to these claims. In 61 AC, at the age of 27, Jaehaerys joined Lord Rhaegar Baratheon in ending the scourge of the Vulture King, who continued to raid the Dornish marches. In the struggle, called the Third Dornish War, the Vulture King and his bandits were defeated. During the fighting, Jaehaerys beat Rhaegar's brother Boros Baratheon in single combat, earning him much respect and esteem. In 84 AC, Jaehaerys learned his daughter Sarah had bedded 3 young knights. He confronted her and confined her to her bedchambers after she suggested she could wed all 3 of them, comparing herself to Maegor the Cruel and his many wives. Furious and ashamed, Jaehaerys is said to have stated more than once that she was no longer his daughter. After Sarah attempted to flee to the dragon pit to steal a dragon, Jaehaerys confined her to a tower cell and dealt with the 3 knights in question, one of whom, Sir Braxton Beesbury, demanded a trial by combat. Sir Braxton was a well-regarded knight in terms of his skill at arms. Most expected Jaehaerys to name a member of the Kingsguard as the crown's champion, but he chose to face Beesbury himself, facing the skilled man 30 years his junior. While Jaehaerys was not an old man at the age of 50, age was expected to be a factor when facing the younger Beesbury. Jaehaerys was armed with Blackfyre, while Sir Braxton chose a Morningstar, hoping the king was unaccustomed to defending himself against this sort of weapon. The youthful Beesbury hoped to overwhelm the older king, but Jaehaerys took every blow on his shield, and when exhausted, Braxton was unable to raise his arm in defense. Jaehaerys cut him several times in the weak points of his armor and stabbed him through the visor. So while he mostly is remembered for his skill as a peacemaker and politician, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, to many surprise, was a well-regarded warrior as well. Maybe not as naturally gifted as Visenya or Maegor, but certainly from the evidence we have nearing their level. Over the next 2 generations, we have 3 Targaryens who really stand out as warriors. The second son of King Jaehaerys, Baelon the Brave, was a skilled warrior from a very young age. When his elder brother Aemon began training at arms with a wooden sword, Baelon was deemed too young to join his brother. Regardless, Baelon brought a stick to the yard and began whacking his brother. Baelon and Aemon would become very close, training at arms together every day, in spirited contests which drew large crowds of spectators. In 72 AC, Baelon took part in a squire's melee during a tourney set to celebrate Lord Darkland's wedding, in which he was defeated by Aemon, who at this time was much more experienced than his younger brother. But Baelon won his spurs the following year at the age of 16 during the tourney at Old Oak, entering the lists as a mystery knight called the Silver Fool. Baelon unhorsed Lord Rowan, Sir Alan Ashford, both Fossoway twins, and Lord Oakheart's heir Sir Dennis, before falling to Sir Rickard Redwine. Sir Rickard helped him to his feet, unmasked him, and knighted the prince on the spot. Baelon remained at Old Oak only for the feast, afterwards returning to King's Landing, where he became a dragon rider, claiming Rhaegar. With his father and brother Aemon, Baelon would take part in the short 4th Dornish War, utilising his dragon in the single battle of it. In 92 AC, Prince Aemon was slain on Tarth by one of the Myrish exiles who occupied the eastern half of the island. Baelon flew on Rhaegar to Tarth to avenge his brother, and fought the exiles with Dark Sister. The fact that Dark Sister was specifically mentioned suggests that he did not use his dragon during some of the fighting, with, by all accounts, Baelon fighting with an unseen prior ferocity. He was cheered on by crowds when he returned to King's Landing and named heir by his father. Baelon would die in 101 AC, suddenly at the age of 44, so we never really got to see what more he could have done with his skills. Baelon's second son, Prince Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince, would carry on his father's mantle and become a renowned warrior in his own right. Daemon was also knighted at 16, and at some point, King Jaehaerys gifted him Dark Sister. Now, something that if you look at with the wielders of Dark Sister, is it tends to be wielded by the most gifted warriors of the current generation, unless that person is of course the king. For example, when Maegor became king, he chose to wield Blackfyre over Dark Sister, so given the blade was bestowed to Daemon at 16, suggests he was a skilled warrior. He was also said to perform well at tourneys in both jousts and melees. The only recorded loss for Daemon came at the hands of Sir Criston Cole, who would later become a member of King Viserys' Kingsguard. Criston Cole, in his own right, is regarded as another generational talent as a warrior for his era. He soundly beat Daemon in the melee, knocking Dark Sister from his hand, and also later beating him in the lists. In 106 AC, Daemon and Corlys Velaryon, the Lord of the Tides, allied for a private war for the Stepstones, with Daemon desiring his own petty kingdom and Corlys wanting to rid the Stepstones of the rule of the Triarchy. While Corlys provided the Valyrian fleet, Daemon flew on his dragon Caraxes and led an army of adventurers and second sons. He made many enemies from Lys, Myr and Tyrosh, and he slew the feared Craghas Drahar in 108 AC. After conquering all but 2 of the islands, he declared himself king of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, in 109 AC, being crowned by the Sea Snake. The Triarchy launched a massive fleet under Rancalio Rhydun to retake the Isles, and Dorne later joined the alliance against Daemon. Now, the issue with Daemon's war in the Stepstones is we don't really know how much of it was conducted on dragonback and how much of it was done with sword and shield. At the very least, it seems that he slew Craghas Drahar in single combat, but we don't know enough about Drahar to really say how big of a test this was for Daemon. In 115 AC, Daemon abandoned the Stepstones and flew the Vale of Arryn to claim Runestone, which had been his wife Ray's seat, but he refused by House Royce. Sent away from the Vale by Lady Jane Arryn, Daemon turned to Driftmark, where he laid his eyes upon the enchanting Laena Velaryon, the daughter of his friend Corlys, and asked the Sea Snake for her hand in marriage. But Laena was already betrothed to the son of the late Sea Lord of Braavos, but Daemon killed the Braavosi with Dark Sister in a duel. Now again, while we know little about this Sea Lord's son, given his background and position, it's not hard to believe he had at least some good level of martial training. Now, the Dance of the Dragons itself, it seems that all of Daemon's battles are fought on dragonback, with no recorded instances showing him using a blade in combat other than the battle above the God's Eye, which was still on dragonback. However, the manner in which he used his blade during the battle does at least attest to his sheer reflex and skill with it. Very few men could have done what Daemon did that day. Aemond Targaryen, the second son of King Viserys and Alicent Hightower, was also regarded as an excellent warrior. But he possesses the same issue historically as Aegon the Conqueror, where we are told of how good of a swordsman he was, but there is never an opportunity where we see it, as most of Aemond's fighting in the Dance of the Dragons is done on dragonback. The only factor we have to hang on to is the fact that Aemond was personally trained by Sir Criston Cole, who, as we know, was among the best warriors of his generation. Therefore, it's not hard to see how Aemond, a willing student, could have developed under Cole's watchful eye. Prince Aemon Targaryen, known as the Dragonknight, was the second son of King Viserys II and Lady Lara Rhaegar. During the reign of his uncle, King Aegon III, Aemon joined the Kingsguard at the age of 17. He later rose to the rank of Lord Commander. After the death of Aegon III, Aemon continued to serve 4 subsequent kings. Aemon was renowned as one of the greatest knights in the history of the Seven Kingdoms, not just of his generation, noted for both his martial skill and his chivalry. His prowess with a sword was considered exceptional, and his legacy endured long after his death. More than a century later, the Dragon Knight is remembered as a popular figure in songs, stories, and legends, both by the nobility and the small folk. Aemon was very accomplished in the lists, and with sword, that he was deemed worthy of carrying the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister. He took part in the bloody invasion of Dorne led by his cousin King Daeron I. He prevented an assassination attempt on Daeron by throwing himself in the path of a poisoned arrow meant for the king. Aemon survived the poison, but was sent back to King's Landing to recover. Upon his recovery, he returned to Dorne to protect his king, and won great fame by defeating a Dornish champion. A rebellion in Dorne undid Daeron's conquest, however. Aemon was with Daeron when he met the Dornishmen under a peace banner in 161 AC, together with 4 other knights of the Kingsguard. 3 of those Kingsguard knights died defending their king. 1 shamefully yielded, and Aemon was captured after slaying 2 of the betrayers. Later in life, while disguised as a mystery knight, Prince Aemond once won a tourney after his brother had forbidden him from taking part, because Aegon wanted to crown his mistress of that time as the Queen of Love and Beauty. After winning as the Knight of Tears, Aemon crowned his sister and Aegon's wife as the Queen of Love and Beauty instead. Despite Aegon's disrespect and hatred towards Aemon, Aemon died honourably, defending his brother and king against assassins. King Aegon IV did little to honour the Dragon Knight's memory. Aegon began to markedly barely veiled references to his son Daemon's alleged illegitimacy, something he only dared to do because both Daenerys and Aemon were now dead. Aegon's attempts to blacken his brother's name ultimately failed, as Aemon is remembered as a heroic figure on par with the legends of the Age of Heroes, and his memory is greatly respected throughout Westeros, while his king and brother was dubbed Aegon the Unworthy. 3 of King Aegon IV, the Unworthy's bastard children, known collectively as the Great Bastards, were said to also be very skilled warriors. Daemon Blackfyre has been described as almost inhumanly beautiful, but looking every inch the warrior, with many thinking he strongly resembled the portraits of Aegon the Conqueror. Daemon was raised in the Red Keep and taught by the Master at Arms Sir Quinton Ball. In 182 AC, when he was 12 years old, Daemon participated in a squire's tourney, which he won. King Aegon IV personally knighted Daemon and publicly bestowed the Targaryen Valyrian steel blade Blackfyre on him, finally publicly acknowledging him as his son. There were some who felt that the sword symbolized the monarch, as it had been the sword of King Aegon the Conqueror, and had been passed down from king to king ever since. Aegon's public gift of the sword would eventually start the first talk that Daemon should be king. Following the acquisition of Blackfyre, Daemon took the name Blackfyre for himself. While the tourney was a squire's tourney with a lower level of skill involved, we must recall that Daemon, being 12 years of age, would likely have been fighting boys much older than him. Not only does this mean they would have had more training, but were more physically developed. This really highlights just how skilled Daemon was in combat. In 187 AC, Daemon participated in Princess Daenerys Targaryen's wedding tourney and was defeated in the final tilt by Prince Baelor Targaryen, King Daemon II's eldest son. While this was a loss, we must recall that Prince Baelor II is held up as one of the best warriors of his age. Now we know a surprisingly little amount about the first Blackfyre rebellion, other than the Red Grass Field itself, where Daemon's uprising ended in late 198 AC. According to Sir Eustace Osgrey, who fought on Daemon's side, Daemon fought like the warrior himself. But we must also recall that Sir Eustace does have a very pro-Daemon bias, so this must be factored into this conversation. Daemon shattered the lines of Lord Donald Arryn's vanguard, leaving the loyalists in peril until Sir Gawain Corbray at the Kingsguard arrived with reinforcement. Daemon and Sir Gawain duelled, with both men using their Valyrian steel swords. The duel is said to have lasted over an hour before Daemon gained the upper hand. Corbray was wounded and Daemon dismounted to prevent Corbray from being trampled. He commanded Corbray was taken off the field. This duel has very much become legendary. As we know, members of the Kingsguard are typically the best of knights, and Daemon not only won, but had the stamina to fight non-stop for over an hour. In the meantime, Brendan Rivers, Bloodraven, with his archers, the Raven's Teeth, had captured and assumed position atop the Weeping Ridge, which overlooked the battlefield and allowed them to rain down arrows among Daemon and his commanders. Daemon's heir, Aegon, died first, followed by Daemon himself. When Daemon's second son, Aegon's twin brother Aemon, took up Blackfyre, he was slain as well. It seemed sensible to also discuss Bloodraven. We don't have that many cases of Bloodraven being active in combat, but it does seem that he was good enough of a swordsman to be given Dark Sister. During the Red Grass Field, he duelled another half-brother, Aegor Rivers, after killing Daemon, but it seemed that Aegor and Bloodraven were equally matched in skill, wounding each other and Bloodraven losing an eye. Aegor too was a very strong warrior, going on to form the Southsword Company, the Golden Company, and being the thorn in the side of House Targaryen for a generation. But while Bloodraven was a decent swordsman, he was more so a deadly warrior with a longbow. He wielded a weirwood bow and was so accurate from miles away that even at these long ranges, some said he used magic to guide his arrows. 2 of the sons of King Daemon II, Baelor Breakspear and Maekar Targaryen, also came to prominence as warriors during the first Blackfyre rebellion, becoming Becoming known as the Hammer and the Anvil, a warrior of great renown, Baelor seemed to all that could be wished in a knight, lord, or heir. He was a man who could win respect with ease, and he was open-handed and as just as his father, King Daemon II. Baelor treated honourable foes with clemency. He distinguished himself first in the first Blackfyre rebellion by leading the Dornish and Stormland forces with an attack at the rearguard of Daemon's rebel army during the Redgrass Field. Baelor's forces smashed the rebels against the shield wall of his brother, Prince Maekar, inspiring the song about the hammer and the anvil. His younger brother, the thickly built Maekar, was a powerful man who utilised his strength to his advantage in combat. While he was skilled in tourney combat, it appears that Baelor outshone him on these occasions, due to him likely being the elder brother and with more experience of tourneys. Both men would fight bravely and savagely during the infamous tourney at Ashford Meadow, specifically during the trial of 7 of Sir Duncan the Tall, that has since become a popular tale among the small folk. Both men were clearly highly skilled, even if examples of it is very limited. Maekar's second son, Aerion, was also a very skilled tourney knight, especially when it came to jousting. However, his reputation is very much overlooked and sullied by his own arrogance and dishonourable approach to the sport. It is said he achieved great renown while fighting in the Third Blackfyre Rebellion. However, we currently have no idea what he did to earn this praise. Finally, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen is the perfect example of a Targaryen who was not a naturally gifted warrior like most on this list, but through hard training and dedicated practice, became well regarded. At the age of 17, he was knighted, and by all reports grew into a skilled and capable fighter. The prince always distinguished himself well at tourneys, although he seldom entered the lists himself. Unlike warriors such as Robert Baratheon or Jaime Lannister, Rhaegar was not enthusiastic about fighting as a sport. During the Great Tourney at Harrenhal, he seemed unstoppable and defeated even Sir Arthur Dayne, the best warrior of his generation, taking the Winter Rose crown for the Queen of Love and Beauty. He revealed his interest in Lyanna Stark by passing over his wife, Princess Elia, and sitting it in Lyanna's lap. The next year, Rhaegar seemingly kidnapped Lyanna for reasons unknown, the act ultimately triggering Robert's rebellion and the downfall of House Targaryen. Rhaegar would be killed at the Trident by Robert Baratheon in his first real taste of combat, which does leave many questioning just how good he truly was.